Boom, we're rolling. What's up, Claudio?
Hey, how are you guys?
Doing good. Thanks for being on here, Brendan.
Hello.
Stoked to talk to you guys. You guys are doing some interesting work. I mean, for sure, right?
Yeah, we're doing science. It's a fun time.
We're doing science. Okay, yeah. Yeah, because I mean, well, I got hooked into you guys because I'm reading, I just, enjoy reading stuff. Articles occasionally pop up or whatever. And one pops up that says, are monkeys heading into the Stone Age, which is, a little grabbing, but, and then you guys are involved. So let's just start with, give me a little bit of background on each of you guys if we can, just so we know who you are.
Okay. Should I go first, Claudio?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Sure. All right. So my name's Brendan Barrett. I guess technically in like 11 days, I'll be starting as a senior researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Animal Behavior and the University of Constance in Germany. I'm currently at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, and I'm also affiliated with the Smithsonian Institute.
Wow. Sweet.
Yeah.
How about you,
So
Claudio?
yeah. So I just before we started all this pandemic situation, I graduated from UC Davis from a master in animal behavior, and now I am technically in the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior, but I'm trapped by the pandemic in Panama at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, which is also like my host institute in Panama. So yeah, now I'd like to start a PhD in Germany, but data collection happens in Panama. So this is probably a good place to be trapped during the pandemic, because then I can just start collecting data as soon as this reopen.
Oh, okay. So not a bad place to be, I guess. But
Yeah,
so how long have you been there?
I flew here on December 18,
Oh,
and
okay.
like just before the news started to create chaos worldwide.
Man, okay. So let's dig into, like, tell me about Coiba National Park and, your involvement there and what you guys, how that all got started, I guess.
Yeah, sure. I'll start, and then if you want to talk about the more recent stuff after that, Claudio. So Coiba National Park is national park in Panama off the Pacific coast. The main island, Coiba, it lies about 24 kilometers away from the western coast of Panama. Coiba is the biggest island in Central America, so it's about 500 square kilometers. It's about the size of like 9 to 10 Manhattans, if you were to put them all together.
Okay.
It's been isolated from the mainland of Panama for about 12 to 18,000 years. I think like recent maps, Claudio, of the sea level has around like 14 or 15. So the range seemed pretty good that we've been citing in the literature until recently. But, it has a interesting history. When Spanish conquistadors came originally to Coiba, there was a large indigenous population there. Unfortunately, like a lot of Central America, many of them died from disease and also being transported to the Darien, part of Panama, for gold mining and slavery. So unfortunately, they were completely exterminated by conquistadors. And building on that other dark human history, Panama was a penal colony from 1919 to 2004. They had anywhere from like 100 to 1,000 prisoners at any time. And for that reason, people didn't go there. And also for that reason, resources really weren't heavily extracted. So it contains about 70 to 80% of primary tropical forests. It has some of the largest stands of lowland tropical forests in all of Central America. So, and it was gazetted as a national park when, Claudio? Like the 70s?
2004.
No, 2004. It was proposed in the 70s.
Yeah,
so,
it was proposed in the 70s. Because even though like people would not go to this place other than police and military people during the military decades of Panama, there would always be one or two naturalists or researchers coming through the Smithsonian that will like move or ask requests to whoever they needed to request to be allowed to visit the island. And there is like, if we see the scientific production on Coiba National, or from data coming from National Park from the last century, we will see that it's only like 10 papers in 100 years. And
Wow.
then as soon as it was like the prison colony like shut down, then we see the production of papers just like going up in a
Right.
very nice scale. So yeah, it's just like everybody was just like waiting for like the prison to end and then be more safety place to visit.
That is crazy. So like, so was the whole island kind of a prison, or was it just they just kind of blocked it all off because there was a prison on it, or what was that?
They had different like camping spots across the island. I mean, each of them is like a just like a tiny place, but they will distribute it across different places on the island depending on the type of prisoners they wanted to keep there. Like if there are
Jeez.
some prisons that we have been to that they are like super creepy because they are like in the middle of the forest, but still they get a lot of mosquitoes when the tides goes up and down. So depending on how the level of torture they wanted to give prisoners, then they will send them to the nice ones, or like the ones on the north of the island are really nice. The ones on the south of the island are like a nightmare. Like not even for camping, for fun. I will not recommend. That will not be fun.
Good God. It's like Escape from New York. It's like literally the whole island's turned into a prison. That's crazy. And so
Yeah,
there's still the structures are still kind of there. You can explore them a little bit.
some of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like isn't some of them where there's the Anam, which is the, if there's American listeners, it's like the equivalent of the National Park Service. Well, there's a bunch of, anyway, I don't want to get bureaucracy details, but they have an Anam station. I think there was a prison there, and also the police station is where another prison was. And we've
Yeah.
hiked around and walked in, and you kind of see just the forest regrowing through where prisoners lived, and you can see plants there that they like had for food, like different fruit
Wow.
trees they wouldn't be randomly scattered through the forest. So, and like writing was on the wall, and it's really, it's eerie but also strangely beautiful to see these places kind of surrounded by this forest and kind of growing back. But it's, yeah, it's a really interesting place. And one thing I don't think we mentioned is that Coiba is the biggest island,
Hmm.
but it's an archipelago. So there's a whole bunch of islands in this ecosystem,
Okay.
or in this national park. So we work currently on 3 of them because that's where the ones that there are monkeys are. But there's a whole system of islands in there, and the guards actually lived on one of the other islands and would commute to work at some of the prisons,
Yeah.
like on a boat in the morning. So
Jeez. That is so crazy. Such a crazy history backstory on that island. I didn't realize that. So and then so what was kind of the uh what were kind of the effects of that when then it was, turned into sort of a national park in 2004? Was it, you know, did it have a lot of negative effects, or was it a lot of it kind of preserved naturally?
It was preserved naturally even before the prison because the prisoners, for some, I mean, it is a very dense forest
Hmm.
for local people. They will not walk into this because there are no trails. I mean, they made some trails to reach some areas, but the place, even during the prison time, it was very preserved. Like you could see the vegetation, the type of forest is like very mature. That will take even like more than 100 years to reach that state. So you can see it's been preserved. Like some places where they had some like roads and like, they even have some little um, airports, but not like airports, just like for one tiny flight.
Hmm.
And then you see that those spaces now are becoming are in the process of restoration in a natural way, and it's to reach because they are from on the beach to the forest. Then you walk like 2.5 kilometers in the middle of bushes before you can reach the forest, and that could be tiresome because you're exposed to sun and the salinity from the ocean, and then walking on this exposed to the sun for like 1 hour and a half, you are like completely dead, and then you need to start doing work, and it's like, come on. So there are like two spots that are very challenging on that way, but yeah, for people, I'm from Chiriquí, which is just like uh, and 2 hours from the island.
Mhm.
So to me, it will just be a rumor. Like you would only listen. You grew up listening like, oh, this prison where they in the middle of the Pacific, these islands, and like it's a devil place and super
Right.
scary, and you shouldn't go there. Like never plan to go there. And then I was like, I want to go there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine how the rumors would swirl with that. So that's cool. And okay, so then tell me, um, so in 2004 it was turned into a national park, and then when do you guys go there? How do you get involved?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is it? Should we talk about Alicia first? I guess.
Yeah, so even from the mid 90s, there was this Spanish researcher, Alicia Ibanez, who was part of like an international collaboration where they will be looking for plants and any type of natural resources where they could explore for chemical compounds to make medicine, or to make any antibiotics, or any type of medical products.
Right.
And so her job was to go to this island and explore the plants. And then what started just as small expeditions become about like 20 years of expedition. And then she made a book of the flora of the island, and it's like a keystone literature for everybody else, because I mean, and also she is like the advisor of everyone who wants to go to that island,
There it is.
because because she knows what are the good places, what are places are easy to access, what are the seasons, how long you should stay on the island to keep a good mental state, because
Mm,
after it's so isolated, like you don't have phone reception, there's no internet, there's no electricity, that like her advice is like, don't stay on the island more than 20 days,
really?
because otherwise you start losing your mind after that. After that, maybe after being in quarantine with the pandemic, we are already training ourselves to be on the island for longer, but
Right.
but yeah, so she had in one of her expeditions, I guess that around 2007, she was visiting Hicaron Island, and then she saw the monkeys doing the hammering behavior, and then she just, as a botanic person, she was like, oh, monkeys are using stone, whatever.
Whatever. I'm just going to count plants. Like,
No biggie.
okay.
Yeah. And then, but she recorded the location just that the GPS on those days, I mean, the GPS available for researchers were not like as the ones as we have today. And then she passed it to our mentor, Meg Crawford. And then that was on Meg's list, things to do, like, oh, we need to go to this place and explore it and find data and blah, blah, blah. But then, because of all the job that Alicia did on the island, there was all this community and the Smithsonian and other institutions that they were inspired to just do a bioblitz on the island.
Oh,
And then people come together, and then they organize a bioblitz of about 45 people from like 30 institutes from all over the world to come to this island on 2015. And we spent about 40 days total between dry season and rainy season. And I was lucky to be one of the researchers, well, out in those days, field assistants invited to participate here. And then Meg heard that I was there, so that gave her someone who she knew that will get more familiar with the place. And but those days, Brendan was finishing his PhD, and so it was just like, I have two people to send to Koiwa.
right.
Which
Okay.
we then that's when we met and coordinated like a first field trip in 2017, and started to explore the area, finding for this particular place that Alicia uh, had visited in Jicaron. And so that's when the whole adventure started, because we didn't have the GPS coordinate that she recorded in those days, because somehow between the communication between Alicia and our advisor Meg, the coordinates got lost. So we were
Oh
starting
God.
from zero.
Yeah, and
And
they forgot to tell us what island it was on. They're like, "Oh, we knew what island it's on." They're like, "It's in this
yeah,
park, it's the biggest island in Central America, just somewhere.
Jeez.
Go out
yeah.
for 8 days and see what you can do."
And the description was like, there are a lot of rocks. The monkeys are there. It's like, yeah, there are monkeys all over on this island. There
Look
Right.
for
are
this
rocks.
plant.
Yeah. So we spent, I think, on the first trip, we had a 5 days field trip looking for it, or trying to refine this place. And it
Right.
was not until the last day that we saw like solid evidence that that was the place that we were looking for. And because before that, the first 2 or 3 days, everything that we will see, we're like, could this be this? It was like we were just looking forever. It was like you have this island effect of things building on your mind, and
Right.
then yeah,
Yeah,
but
it was hilarious. Like we were walking around. Like it was like a 7-day trip total, and then it was like the first day to takes a day to get out there, get
Mhm.
checked in, get camp set up, do everything, and then we had days where we take boats around and hike across the there's no one out here. There's no trails. We walked as much of the island as we could, like walked the entire coast of the island. So I don't think we mentioned this, but Jicaron is the second largest island in Coiba National Park.
Okay.
So it's like about the size of Manhattan, a little bit smaller. It's like 20 square kilometers or so,
Mhm.
or 2,002 hectares. But yeah, so we were just walking around this island, and as you said, we're going around. We're like, I think this is it, and we're like, these things look like they were split in half. Maybe this is it. Let's take photos. And one of the things is that this is so hard to get out to that we can't, and the monkeys aren't habituated, which means like sometimes the way primatology is conventionally done is you follow the monkeys until they get used to your presence and they're relaxed, and then you can collect behavioral data from a distance.
Right.
In Capuchin monkeys, that takes 6 months to a year until you can start collecting data of following them from dawn to dusk.
Mhm.
And the infrastructure here is such that you can't study them in conventional ways. So what we've been doing is setting up these remote sensed camera traps and video traps on where we think stone tool use is. But so back to the story is like we were walking around, setting up these camera traps, these potential tool use sites. Every day we're like, oh, this is definitely it. This is it. Like, I think this is it. Let's set up a camera here just in case. Like maybe that's just the tide blowing shells around and putting rocks on top of them.
Oh
And
yeah.
then on the last day, we originally had taken boat around the island and places looking for these trees called almendros, or almendros in plural. Sea almonds is the common name. Terminalia catapa is the scientific name. We were like looking for them from the coast, identifying spots where you could find these trees. And we saw this one spot on the far west side of the island where we're looking at it and we're like, we have to check out that. There's so many of these trees, but we don't know if we can walk there
Mhm.
because there's cliffs on the one end. And then I don't remember if it was our idea or the boat captain's idea, but a boat captain, Alicia, who's just like amazing, has worked there. He just knows the island very well and knows the ocean really well. And like, he's probably the most valuable member of this research group sometimes.
Right.
We threw a bunch of cameras into dry bags, put on life vests. He backed up the boat into this like cove that was surrounded by rocks, and we like jumped out and swam in to the coast, got off, climbed up the rocks, walked up, set up a camera.
Jesus.
Then we walked and we're like, oh, this is tool use. Oh,
Really?
we were wrong. I think we were wrong in everything else. And it was just so
yeah,
blatantly obvious that like there's just smashed crabs, piles of debris. It's like a bar floor covered in peanuts. These
Wow.
monkeys have just been opening up stuff, and it's just like a litter of just food that they've been opening up, and just like a rock sitting on a crab on this like little stone anvil. And next to that was this big wooden anvil where we found other tools and all this other debris that they were processing. And we're like, this is definitely it. We set up the
Yeah.
cameras. We only had 3 cameras, and we had to get out of there before the tide rose. So we really only spent like, what, 40 minutes, half an hour at the site.
Yeah.
And then we had to swim out immediately. And then we came
Yeah.
back like 3 months later and we caught it on footage. And it was actually the same anvil that Alicia found, what, 10 years before or so. So it was the same exact log that they've been using for at least 15 years.
Man,
So,
that is so cool.
It was all funny because it was like, about like 45 minutes. And then it was just like all the scary part of jumping off the boat because we were in the low tide, and then going to check the place and see that this is actually a stone tool evidence, and then get excited, but set the cameras because we needed to make sure the cameras were like set correctly to get properly the data, and then get back. And it was just like too much things going on first for only 45 minutes, like being stressed, happy, excited, and serious and focused on the job at the same time. It's just like, okay, this is probably too much for people's mind.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, and then
then we went back like 4 months later, and we got to explore that coast more. It was just like there were so many more sites. It was just such intensive use, like things that have been clearly used for decades. No, not clearly. Probably, most likely used for decades, conditional on evidence that we have to do science to figure out. And there's just tools all over the place, and it's something that like you couldn't mistake it for anything else. It's just something very intentional and left behind.
Yeah.
Man,
then
so cool.
as we have been going, because then we go 3 times a year, because that's about a good time to replace the batteries and the memory of the camera.
Mm-hmm.
So now every time we go, we still learning after now 3 years of going to this place. We keep learning on every trip. And then, but I remember a funny one that I think it was on the 3rd trip that there was the idea of removing the stones so that we could weight them properly in a more like settled place. And I was refusing to do that because like, we don't know if that's going to disrupt the monkeys. Let's not do that. And then, and then Brendan, Meg, they were like, no. And also that was my first time working with Capuchin monkeys. So they were more experienced about how the monkeys could react to like this type of thing. And I was just like, no, let's not move the stones, because I was like worried the monkeys will abandon the place or whatever. Like I don't know. I was just like a new person in Capuchin monkeys work.
Right.
And so they convinced me that it would be fine. And then I was like, okay-ish with letting that happen. But then we removed the stones. And then when we went to put the stones back, they have replaced all the stones. It was like insane. I was like, what? I was fighting for you monkeys and you betrayed me. so
wow.
yeah,
So
it was,
you well, so you took the stones away to measure them or weigh them, but then they had totally replaced the stuff that you took away.
yes. Yeah, like we went back like a day and a half or 2 days after we replaced them, and then in each of the spots that they were doing the hammerstone, they had new stones. And now after so much data collection, we have seen in some of the photos that sometimes there is some sort of selfishness going on, because some individuals, they will move stones and get their own stones, or some of the stones get broken because that is not the right material, and then they anyways have to replace them. But those are things that we didn't, or I didn't know in that day we're deciding to remove or not to remove the stones, to weight them and get data.
Yeah. So you can look at like the camera traps sometimes, and sometimes they'll just use what's there. And other times, you'll see a monkey will go up, look at the stone that's not there, and there's a lot of like streams around there, and I think like a lot of the stones just get washed down by erosion, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
So they go grab a cobble out of the river and they'll carry that up and then use that to open up most of these almendras, and like they're big stones. So I think these guys are technically the smallest body mass primate that uses stone tools, and from the specimens from Coiba collected in 1900, they're smaller than mainland capuchins, which is a typical thing on islands. Things often can shrink down.
Mm-hmm.
And they're using stones that are like 1,500 grams to 2,000 grams. And an adult capuchin weighs 3,500 kilograms. An adult male, big adult male might get a little bit big more, but they're a third to like a half of their body weight sometimes.
Jeez, that's crazy.
So it's
Yeah.
like, they're probably not just doing it for kicks, but
Right.
we have to do science to gather evidence for that.
Yeah.
So
So when you guys heard about, when you were kind of first told about, there's monkeys here that could be using stone tools and stuff, and then when you finally got there, was that on par with your expectations, or was that were you guys kind of blown away by what you found?
you want to go first, Claudio?
I was, yeah, because when I first heard about that from during the Coiba Bio Blitz in 2015, I was just like, oh yeah, whatever, monkeys are using stones. I was not familiar with anything from the literature on capuchin monkeys or primates at all. I jumped from studying orchid bees, um, I come from studying like orchid bees, then vipers, and then I switched to mammals, and then that's what I'm more like settled now. But then it was like first time exposed to primate literature research. So I was just at the beginning like, oh yeah, the monkeys are using stones, whatever. That's
Right.
just a normal thing, because you have heard about the Stone Age, and then that we did it at some point, so other monkeys could do it. But I didn't realize that it would be such a big thing for like only of the other primate species, only a few of them are using stones now in the way humans did it thousands of years ago. So that's when I thought, I was like, oh, this is actually a big deal.
Right. Yeah, because when you frame it that way, it is fairly unusual, isn't it, for this to happen?
Yeah. And like from my background, like I guess I don't know, I studied plants and insects before I ended up doing primates, but I'm kind of mostly like theoretically motivated. So all of my interests are in social learning and cultural evolution, and kind of how social learning helps animals acquire behaviors like tool use, and how that helps them enable them to survive in rapidly changing environments and just make a living. So for my PhD work, I did research on capuchin monkeys. I've studied them since 2008 with habituated groups in Costa Rica. So I had spent like 4 years of my adult life following capuchin monkeys up from dusk till dawn. I could like tell them apart better than I can tell most human beings apart.
Wow.
But which is not good for my social life with humans at least. But one of the things that was really interesting to me was that if you look at the evolutionary tree of primates, in capuchin monkeys, there's robust capuchins, which are like it's a new genus called Sapajus, which got updated in the beginning part of the century. And then they're the robust capuchins. They're a little bit bigger. For pop culture reference, like The Hangover, I think that's a chain of movies. That was a robust capuchin in that. And then the gracile capuchins are the Central American and Northern South American capuchin monkeys, which are what these ones are all in Panama and Cueva National Park. So they split apart from each other about 5 million years ago. And for reference, the human chimpanzee divergence part was 6 to 7 million years ago. So it's like a comparable split a little bit sooner than chimpanzees and humans.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the startling behavioral differences is that Sapajus, the South American robust capuchin monkeys, most of the species have been reported using stone tools and using them pretty frequently. But in Cebus, the gracile capuchins, that hadn't been reported. Although they do have a wide array of cultural traditions, they're super intelligent. They're often trained as like helper monkeys for paraplegics. They have been used for that. So they're really smart and they socially learn a lot. And for a lot of people who study robust or gracile capuchins, they seem entirely capable of it. And I think the cool thing about seeing this in Coiba is that you have a counterfactual example of these gracile capuchin monkeys using stone tools. So in some ways, the question is, instead of asking why is it that these monkeys use stone tools, it's almost more of an interesting question is, why is it that don't all the other gracile capuchin monkeys use stone tools? And so is it
Yeah.
here. The really cool thing about this population is that you have a counterfactual example where this goes on, and then you have a ton of well-studied field sites where this doesn't go on, so you can actually do a comparison between non-tool using and tool using populations, which it isn't as feasible in things like chimpanzees because it's pretty widespread. Robust capuchins, it's probably not as feasible because it's pretty widespread, although it's you know, it's a little bit different. But the only other thing it might be comparable within primates is these populations of macaques in Thailand, off the coast of Thailand and Myanmar, who are also on islands, and they're the only species of these macaques that habitually use stone tools, and they all live on islands. So one of our big questions is, what is it about islands in particular, like Corbin National Park, that is so conducive to innovative behavior and stone tool use? And it's not just in primates. So you can look at things like New Caledonian crows off the coast of Australia. They habitually use stick tools. Galapagos finches, not sticks, sorry, I have to correct myself. It's this like Panidus palm that they'll cut open and modify and use to extract grubs. Galapagos finches will use sticks in the islands, the different islands in the Galapagos Islands. It's redundant, but they use sticks to access things in cactus spines. And Hawaiian crows have also been shown to use tools. And they're actually being reintroduced into the wild now because they almost went extinct. But there's something about islands that's conducive to tool use, and that's kind of one of the things that we're trying to understand in like a broader scale across capuchins or gracile capuchins, and also kind of doing some comparative work. So we're starting to do some comparative work between these macaques and these capuchins, because they both use stone tools and both live on islands. They actually both open up some identical resources, so you can do some cool comparative natural history.
Yeah, like
Wow.
the almond species tree is the same species on both places, because this almond tree is originally from Asia. So it's just cool to have this model where you can compare things in a very fine scale.
So yeah, so what are kind of the findings that you guys are getting, if you have anything yet, of why islands lead to this tool use like that?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I think one of the things is that islands often have a reduced, so there's this classic thing in ecology of the island called the island theory of biogeography. So oftentimes when islands get further away from the mainland and when they're also smaller, you get a subset of species that are available on the mainland. So this can mean for the capuchins that, so like on Hikaron, I forget the numbers off the top of my head, but there's like an order of magnitude fewer plant species on Hikaron than there are on Koiba, and there's far fewer on Koiba than there are in the mainland.
Right.
So they don't have a wide variety of dietary things that they could use. So one of the ideas is that because there isn't as much to eat there, a variety of things might need this to open thing. They might need to do this to make a living in this ecosystem. Islands are often more prone to like edge effects and El Nino cycles and La Nina cycles in this part of the world. So there could be some ecological stress. And there's also no large terrestrial predators on this island, which Claudio has been doing from the Camera Traps and the BioBlitz, has recently published some work about that.
And so, well, yeah. So why is that significant, Claudio, about there being no predators like that?
Well, when we have a place with predators, there is a lot of trade-off on an individual for whatever species, even if it's a ground animal or an arboreal animal. Like for ground animals, what's the time you go out to get food or to trying to find someone to mate with? These are very important decisions for an animal like an agouti, which is a small rodent from Central America. So for that animal, it's very like, it's risky all the time to take a decision. For arboreal animals, it's a bit more safety if they can move through the canopy, because that way they avoid the ground predators
Right.
in most of the distribution. But there is also trade-off, because moving through the canopy is not as simple. It's not like you don't have like 2 meters wide path to move. You have like thin branches, and some of them could break, or the connectivity between the trees is not always complete. So you have to jump and to have to maneuverate a lot during the day.
Hmm.
So it's a lot of investment of energy to move through the canopy. And so, but if you remove that pressure of predators from the equation, then you can get access to resources on both ways. You can. Then we think that the capuchin monkeys on Coiba National Park have the capacity to reach resources on the canopy and on the ground. And so far, we have been collecting data for what they are collecting on the ground. Like we see that they go for the hammerstone tool places, and they get a lot of resources there. But also we see them getting coconuts, and then that happens all over the island, which is always funny to see evidence of the monkeys doing that. Um, but then also how that also affects the dynamics between the groups are one of the things that we are now interested in. So you have Coiba Island and Jicaron Island, the two largest islands on this park that at some point were connected to the main line before the last glaciation.
Hmm.
And then this species just like subset from island to island until we reach Coiba with only like 8 mammals, and then Jicaron with like 5 mammal species. And on that list, there are no predators. So for both islands, then the monkeys now, they can just come to the ground, start exploring more, and it's more like it's very free for them to do. And then the release of, not only the release of pressure, but also the the uh, this assignment of investment. Like now, on the mainland, what monkeys assign energy on like traveling, then the monkeys perhaps can do it on hammering stones because they can just do it. They have the it's when you have money and you don't know what to spend the money on, and then just go for whatever you want.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, because isn't that kind of similar? Like, didn't something like that kind of happen with humans where once kind of our basic, you know, needs and, for food and stuff were kind of uh, more provided for and stuff, we just kind of had more time for thinking and developing new inventions and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, like yeah, it's definitely like this idea where it's and one of the yeah. So I want to take a step back. So with the kind of the affordance of free time that they might get, so like the absence of predators here and the work that Claudio has done, like they're on the ground so much more from camera traps that you can see. So they spend so much more time on the ground, and their behaviors on the ground are totally different. So they'll be on the ground from dawn till dusk, whereas in a normal population, they'll be up in the trees at those times at dawn and dusk when there's often predators around. They'll nap on the ground like as the sun's going down. And this is so they have video traps of capuchins just like sleeping in big groups with like infants on the ground when the sun's going down, which is something that you would never see populations doing on the mainland. So it's just like this absence of predators permitting them to go down and explore the ground. It allows them to interact with tools more. But if you think about predation, like these trees and a lot of times stones and these anvils, they are predictable in space. Stone tool use requires concentration, arguably, if you want to do it well. And it's also really loud. So something where you're distracted, predictable in space, and making a lot of noise, it's like, if I was a predator, I would just be lazy and hang out there. So there might be something about this predation thing that reduces the costs of doing it. And we think it's a really important, for at least the capuchins and maybe more broadly in human evolution, part of why they're using stone tools on Jicaron and also in another population on Coiba, which we recently found. But also this other thing about like this other plausible thing, which I don't think you can test this empirically. But when you have downtime and free time and the creative affordances to do stuff, you might be more likely to interact with this material and come up with this solution. It may not be the intention going out, but if you come up with it in your downtime, it could become incorporated as a habitual part of the behavioral kind of repertoire.
Right.
And like this is similar in like a lot of the other anecdotally, and other Capuchins I work with in Costa Rica, they have all these weird bond testing rituals where they'll like play games and pass rocks in between each other's mouth and try to fish them out, and stick their fingers in each other's eye sockets, like 2 knuckles deep, and sniff each
Jeez.
other's hands for like 2 hours at a time. And it's just like weird stuff. And you know, there's theories about it's like a bond testing ritual. It's important stuff for group and social relationships. But this goes on the most anecdotally, like in the dry season when it's super hot and they're just sitting around a water hole or the river because there's like not much else to do because it's too hot to travel around and go anywhere else. So there's something like maybe about this downtime that's really conducive to this innovation. But there's also like a clear story that the reduced predation risk is also key to this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
it's like to give scales. It's like on Barro Colorado Island, which is an island in the middle of the canal with about 30 individuals of ocelots, which is one of their main predators. On this island, in contrast to Coiba and Jicaron, like on Coiba, they come to the ground at least 50 to 60 times more than on BCI, on Barro Colorado. And then on Jicaron, maybe a factor of data collection, but they go to the ground up to like 200 times more than on BCI, where they are predators. And it's not just ocelot, but other species. And when you start seeing, like, because when we started to evaluate this, it was striking to me because I have been processing camera trap photos for about 5 years from central Panama. And I don't remember more than 50 photos of capuchin monkeys across all those years. And it was like, when we collected the camera traps from the Coiba BioBlitz in 2015, about 80% to 85% of all the photos were about capuchin monkeys on the ground doing something. And I was like, why there are so many photos of capuchin monkeys? Like, because you expect like a community of mammals, but here it was not a community of mammals. It was just a community of capuchin monkeys doing different behaviors, different individuals, and you can even recognize individuals. So that was like interesting just to contrast based on photo traps or photograph, the amount of time that is invested on the ground. And then whereas in the mainline, they come to the ground for very short times, they also perform very little activity. Whereas in Coiba and Jicaron, we have photos of the monkeys doing everything, like Brendan say, like playing or exploring, napping, just like scanning the environment, thinking, like getting selfies. I mean, the camera trap per se is a new item for them. Right. They're curious about it, and then they go and check and get in front of the cameras, and in the meantime, they're being recorded multiple times. And we have a lot of capuchin monkeys selfies from every expedition.
They haven't taken an SD card yet that we know of. Well, if they took it, we wouldn't know. So.
Yeah.
No cases. So.
Yeah, but they move the cameras. The cameras, they have like some cable to attach it to the tree, and they move that. So we have to tighten the cable as much as we can so that the monkeys don't move it. Then the camera has like a protector plastic for the lens. They remove that for most of the cameras. So it's like these monkeys are super curious, and there's even this camera of one that have like a stick going to like pick just to play with the camera. It's like these monkeys are insane. I mean, their mental capacity, just too much.
Right, man, that's so cool.
Yeah, and like the other thing that's really striking, like when you're walking through the forest, like if you see capuchins, normally you hear things up. You find them by you hear branches move or you hear vocalizations, but it's totally different because the population densities on Coiba, in particular in Jicaron, are so high. Like it's just so many monkeys. It blows my mind after working in other places in Central America. and they're all on the ground and all spread up. So you don't hear them in the same way. You just hear these things on the ground walking up, and then they all run up. And it's like the opposite of the way you find monkeys anywhere else. You just don't hear them in the trees. So.
Man, oh man, this is so cool.
Yeah.
And then, so, I mean, I don't know if there's an answer to this, but how does this stuff kind of like, how does it first happen? You know, if there's a monkey using a tool, is it just kind of one guy who generally figures it out and then everybody kind of learns from that? Or do you have any ideas of that?
From these observational things that we have, like, that's entirely plausible. That's probably most likely is that, you know, this is not taxonomically widespread, and I think it's safe to say, but you always need the evidence that this is something that was innovated and then spread through the group by social learning, cultural transmission, call it what you will. And in some of the other work I've done in Capuchins, like, they will learn how to do behaviors pretty quickly, and they'll copy the most successful behaviors when they're opening up other fruits and like solving other foraging puzzles. So there's good evidence that this species socially learns foraging behaviors and cultural traditions. But one of the things that, so, you know, we're working on the assumption right now that this is in part socially learned and culturally transmitted. And we have some ideas to do some foraging experiments to kind of get better experimental evidence for it, like remotely kind of some stuff with stone tools. But one of the things that another big question we have is that on Jicaron in particular, Claudio and I have walked all of the coasts of Jicaron, a lot of the streams, and explored a fair amount inland. And this island's filled with monkeys. They're not crawling. But, and the question is, like, this part of the island, which from the camera trap we think is one group, this is the only part of the island where we can find any evidence for stone tool use, despite all these resources being available, all these fruits, all these hermit crabs, all these Halloween crabs, all these marine snails. All these things that they open up are widespread or common throughout the island. But it seems to be really localized within this one group. And that's kind of like a big puzzle that we're trying to figure out. And one of the things that we were a little bit concerned about is that if this is only in one group, which on Jicaron is the evidence we have, we don't want to do anything that would like modify their behavior generally or make them less likely to do it. So we're really careful about how we work there. And we have like it's like a lightweight backpacking kind of camp setup. And we don't interact with the animals that much. Actually, we don't interact with them at all. We just set up the camera traps and they yell at us when they see us, and they watch and they're interested, but they watch from a distance. But
okay.
Yeah, so like one of our big questions is, why is it that it's only this one population on Jicaron? And also in the first year of camera traps on Jicaron, they use them stone tools almost every single day. Like 80% of days or something, they'll use stone tools at some of the sites that we just keep getting repeat samples. But we never observed a female using a stone tool on Jicaron. We observed it in one camera trap image that I've seen in the past 3 years, but haven't gone through them all. And the question is, why is there this why do we detect this insane sex difference where it's almost completely non-existent in one sex, but not the other?
So is there an answer to that, or do we just not know?
We can speculate. I think, well, I have one kind of crazy idea behind it. I think one of the things that might be important to see is we were supposed to go back to the field in January and March, but due to coronavirus and other things, our fieldwork got some limitations. One of the ideas is that they may not do it as closely to the coast. If they're using stone tools, they might be using it kind of in the riparian habitats further up and opening up hermit crabs and Halloween crabs and other fruits. So we're just not detecting it. Right. So that's a possibility where we have to do some other sampling at spots where it's not like trees, so it's not as predictable in space. So there's not like a tree in an anvil. It's like they'll find a crab, grab a stone out of the stream, and kill it and eat it.
I see.
so it's harder to capture. So there's that possibility, is that we're not detecting it. The other possibility is that, this is long and convoluted, if you want to talk about behavioral ecology, is that normally in Capuchin monkeys, males are the dispersing sex. So they grow up in a group, and typically, and the groups are structured where it's females, so females live with their families and their kin within a group. The males will typically migrate when they're about 5 years old to another group and try to immigrate in and be accepted, which they're typically not. The number one cause of male Capuchin death is violence and intergroup encounters from other males. Because there's a lot of stuff about breeding opportunities and risks of infanticide. So it's really costly for a male to migrate to another group, but they can't stay in their family group and breed with their siblings. They're actually a lot better at avoiding incest than humans are. But oftentimes, particularly, not oftentimes, sometimes, especially in high density populations, the dispersal tendencies can reverse for reasons I won't go into details about. So it's possible that on Coiba, or Hicaron in particular, that instead of females dispersing, males are the natal sex and females are the dispersing sex. So one of the reasons this may be localized, if only males are doing it, is because females are dispersing and they're not bringing this behavior or knowledge with them. And the males are the ones that are just staying there, if this pattern holds true.
Interesting.
So we have to do a bunch of genetic work to kind of see if we can find signatures of the social system, to see if the males or females are dispersing, to kind of get a better idea of this. We also we may not have found something yet, which is another possibility, but along where we look, we're pretty sure. But another thing recently is that Claudio actually discovered this on a trip right before I joined, was that we found a second population on Coiba that likely independently innovated this behavior. And these two islands have been isolated for, as we said, 12 to 18,000 years. So we have a second population that we can do comparisons between two different Capuchin groups in Coiba National Park, but they both independently innovated it. And in this population, in the few camera trap images we have, I've seen males and females doing it. So we have to do a lot of camera trapping and genetic work and observations to kind of figure out exactly what the answer is, if we can figure it out.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, when Brenda says if we can figure it out, that means that we have 3 years trying to get DNA data from these Capuchin monkeys. And because they are not habituated, then ideally we could use a blood sample. That's the best for DNA. But that will mean trapping the individuals, and because they are not habituated, when you get close to them, they go away. Right. So our best try is to use hair traps, or to try to, when they are around us, then to see where they deposit fecal sample on the bushes. And so that is just a matter of very random, we have very few, in contrast to the sampling that we have done, the sampling effort, we have very few samples, just because it's so difficult. And then we have been improving a lot during the last, more on the last year, but because it was just try and error. And it was just these monkeys they're it's just insane to see how to get data on them.
Yeah. So we get the fecal sample DNA, which I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Claudio, but they figured out whole genome sequencing from white-faced Capuchin fecal DNA. So we can do that from the feces now, but it's hard to get feces because the monkeys run away from us, and it's all luck.
Yeah.
And we can
it's not a lot of fecal sample now. It's just a little bit that get dispersed.
Depending on what they're eating, if it's usable or not. I won't go into the details about Capuchin.
Right.
But I'm knowledgeable on the topic. And also, so we've been because we do non-invasive sampling, and if we found a we just do non-invasive sampling, and like we find a Capuchin skeleton, that would be great for a bunch of reasons, and you could get DNA out of that, but we haven't found one. Found a bunch of howler monkey skeletons, but we also do these hair traps. So we've been kind of like trial and error modifying non-invasive hair traps where, the monkey can reach in and double-sided tape will capture some hair from their arm, and from that you can extract DNA and do stuff like estimate evolutionary divergence times and estimate stuff about their social systems and do all the wonderful things that you can do with genetics, which we have collaborators working on. But we have export permits, which are the fun part before we figure out answers. So
jeez.
It's really hard to transport hair and feces across international borders. It requires a lot of bureaucracy. Oh yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Stuff like, I just, to me, it's just like, yeah, just go do this. But yeah, the methodology and all the red tape you guys have to go through is just something I wouldn't even, begin to think about.
And Claudio and I are both a little crazy. So the logistics of this work is apparently very, very challenging. So like, aside from doing all the paperwork and coordination, like figuring out how to get out here, set up a camp, get all the permits, have all the safety protocols, know when you can get to the field site. Like one other thing we didn't mention is that you can only hike to this field site during like a 2 or 3 hour window with the tides, and you have to hike along the beach across like the intertidal and like climb a bunch of wet rocks. And it's like not, we have a bunch of safety protocols that we do to make sure everyone can get there, but it's like really logistically challenging. And if anything goes wrong, like you're out there we have satellite trackers and sat phones, you have access to that, but like we had to deal with a lot of figuring out logistics to even be able to do work out here. And we don't realize that because this is just like, oh, we'll just figure out how to do this. No, we brought like, so we mentioned Meg. We mentioned Meg Profit earlier, who's like Claudio's PhD advisor, and I guess my collaborator, who we were all at UC Davis at one point in time in California. When Meg came out there for the first time, she's the director of the Max Planck Institute of the Ecology of Animal Societies group at the Max Planck Institute for Animal Behavior, where we are based out of / will be based out of in like 5 days. And she's also a professor at the University of Constance. So when Meg came out there, and some of our archaeologist collaborators, they're just like, how did you guys do this? And we're just like, I don't know. We just did it, I guess.
Just did it, yeah.
No. The logistic is just impressive. Like I have been, even as a local person, like I've been dealing with this. And I dealt with logistics in Darien, in the border with Colombia, which is also another rough place to do field work. But nothing like Coiba. It's just like above the level. Like you have to deal with things as on how much water you need to take for the amount of people and the amount of days that you will be there on Jicaron, because there is no water sources accessible to the camping spots. Two, as like the food, how much food do we need, and when we go to from the camping spot to the stone tool use site, we have to consider the tides. In which hours of the day can we go to that place? And even in during rainy season, which the rainy seasons are always fun because there is always, and with climate change varying so much from year to year in the last decade, it's hard to predict that there will be a steady weather conditions when we go there. And there has been field trips where we go, and then when we try to reach the stone tool use site, then we can't, because the schedule of the tide say that it will be low tides. But when you go to the site and start walking along the beach, then you see that the tide is no high, no low. It's just like in the middle, and it stay like that for days. And it's just something related to super moons and the way and the tides, and this is the Pacific water. So like, just like super crazy that that on during rainy season, it's more challenging to the camping spot, because these super tides, they can reach all the way into where we are camping. So we don't want to be there when there are these super tides that will just take us into the ocean.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, it is interesting, but
And
it's
you learn
fun. I
not to
mean,
lose things to the tides.
yeah, to
What's
me, it's
that?
just like playing Mario Kart.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me
Yeah,
a lot of like the ghost in Super Mario 3, where you have to like turn and like
Right, yeah.
make sure it doesn't chase you, then looks at it and then run while you have the opportunity. But like, Claudia and I have done a lot of the learning from our experiences to like kind of know when we can do stuff. But like, we were, like we both know exactly how to do this because we've both been caught out by tides and have had to wait 8 to 10 hours until we can continue our hike.
Right.
So,
Sounds
but
fun.
we have a good system down now. But
Yeah.
but yeah, we're kind of like really just starting to get into full gear with this because as I said, like it's so logistically challenging. It's taken like 3 years to kind of know what's possible because
Okay.
there's such a little research presence in this park. And aside from Alicia, some people that collected birds Alexander Wetmore collected birds in the 50s, the group of Panamanian ecologists in the 90s, and some people working with the park, and like some British dude in 1900. Like people really haven't worked here, so we're kind of always figuring out, and the BioBlitz, we're figuring out how to do work out here and what's going on, which makes it like super exciting because there's tons of opportunity for just basic natural history, biodiversity exploration, and kind of like important information that we need to gather for conservation. Like you, Pedro, who's one of our awesome collaborators and field assistants, is an ornithologist, and Claudio just published a paper where what's the bird? There's like a ton of seabirds and tons of endemic species on Coiba and Hicaroni. You guys just kind of expanded that species list.
yeah. So it is funny because Alexander Wetmore is one of like the greatest ornithologists in Panama. Like he made a lot of contribution, and he have one of the bestseller books in New York, I think, for some years ago. And then going to this place, to Cueva National Park, and trying to do a checklist of birds where the same place where you know that this mastermind of ornithology did work is just like scary. But we realized that out of all the islands that he visited on the park, he didn't go to Hicaron. I mean, he visited it one time, but it was just like on a window of 2 hours based on his notes, and then so he didn't record that any birds from this place. And so Pedro has been doing birding for since I know since he's probably 17. So out of 1,000 species in Panama, he can identify about 500 species without the book.
Wow.
So, which is just like I can only do 10 species, and that's probably a lot. But but then he have these skills that while while we are walking to deploy cameras, he's just like listening and recording and like taking notes, and or even like after breakfast, like we will rotate who will go to do dishes, and then he would always like, I want to go and do dishes. Until then, I realized that he wanted to go to do the dishes because that's near a stream, and so near the stream, the vegetation sort of goes down, and then the birds jump from one place to another. And
Right.
so he will spend, like, if Brendan and I go to do dishes, we will spend 10 minutes. He will spend half hour, just because between every dishes he will be like distracting, looking for a bird, and then taking notes, and it's just like. But then out of all this fun adventure, Coiban Hicaron are also on the continental, where the continental shelf ends. So that's when you move into deep waters, and then we can start seeing some of the uh, birds that people will spend a lot of money. I mean, people that is into birding, they will spend a lot of money to go on open waters to see these birds, and then we have them right there in Jicarita,
Hmm.
which is just on the south of Picaron. And then we also have macaws, the scarlet macaws. They come on March, around March, to also eat the almond trees. and a lot of warblers, which is there's a lot of these migratory birds coming all the way from North America, and because they are lowlands, when you go and see the lowlands vegetation cover in Panama on the mainline, there is actually not much. So some of these species, they come to Coiba to spend winter because the vegetation and the resources are available for them as a refugee during winter. So it's really like cool to see different species of birds and even to get them on camera traps, like the nocturnal species. We are more likely to photograph them on the cameras than to observe them.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, well, so we also like expanded the range. We have to publish this still, but like of coral snakes in the Americas. So like every time we go there, we kind of find something that hasn't been described, and there's a ton of really important conservation, basic natural history work that we have to do here in addition to the bigger questions that we're trying to address. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is what you guys are kind of doing, is that kind of opening it up for more people to come in and do their research?
Yeah, so from the Smithsonian Institute, they officially now have an island that was a heritage from someone who bought it when you were allowed to buy islands decades ago. So this
Wow.
person gave the island to Smithsonian, and it's a it's big enough to build a field station. So they're in the process of like renovating, because now the station is the old house that used to be there for like I don't know how many decades. But now Smithsonian is like working on that and also trying to get funding to promote science going on this place, but also education, like through field courses that will spend some time to do marine or biogeography courses. And then from the Panamanian side, there is the Secretary of Science, Senacid, has pushed to promote another research station on Coiba Island on another sector, so that it could be like a platform to contribute between the two institutions. The other funny thing that we haven't mentioned before in the relation to this is that because the park is so new, they have also been doing a lot of trial and error with the policies on the island. So every time we go, there is a chance that we will face new bureaucracy requirements or new processing or new paperwork to provide, or they will remove it, or they will add it, they will bring more to the list. And
Right.
so that makes more exciting doing field work.
Jeez. Man, well, this is so cool that you guys are going out there and doing that and getting this all going. And then I guess another question I had, just to kind of jump back to the Capuchin monkeys and their stone tool use. Does it at all kind of parallel like what humans went through? Like, are we having a Planet of the Apes situation going on, or what's the deal with that?
Planet of the Apes in the sense of, I'm not going to make any Charlton Heston jokes. um, what do you mean? Oh, so like, I think it's interesting in that you have this counterfactual example of where capuchins are kind of, I didn't mention this, they're New World monkeys. They split off from our lineage 39 million years ago. So for understanding human behavior, they're really informative because it's kind of like an independent evolution of complex social behavior, cooperative behavior, heavy reliance on social learning and culture, and this thing that's just kind of like extractive or destructive foraging. So they just go through the forest, harass everything, rip everything apart, explore everything, and that's how they figure out what they can eat. So you can tell when capuchins have passed by. I think one of the interesting things in understanding human behavior is just kind of being able to compare these tool using populations to non-tool using populations, to kind of understand the similar and different ecological pressures that make this adaptive, assuming that it is something that is increasing their ability to survive and reproduce on this island. But I also think there's a lot of, we haven't mentioned this at all, but we're also working with a team of paleoanthropologists and archaeologists. So there's a lot of questions that we can answer from stone tool use sites that are actively being used. So if you think about, you're an archaeologist, paleoanthropologist, you found some percussive stone tool use site that an Australopithecine used 3.5 million years ago. This is something that all you have is what got left behind after 3.5 million years. So one of the crazy things about this is that you see an active tool use site that this kind of percussive early, I get all the, there's a lot of Paleolithic terms I'm bad at, but like early Stone Age, I'm not going to use the French word, I won't go into jargon, but the early Stone Age kind of stone tool use that you'd see in things like Australopithecines, like Lucy, that famous fossil that the Leakeys discovered. You can see what these tool sites look like in real time, and you can map the behavior that we get from these camera traps that these monkeys are doing onto the anvils and onto the stool, onto the stone tools. So you can have a better understanding of the behaviors that produce the patterns we see both in the archaeological record and the paleoanthropological record for human evolution. It's also really important for understanding fossils is because a lot of times with fossils, it's like the fossils and archaeological sites, it's the stuff that's left behind. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of understand the preservation biases in these types of ecosystems. And as I mentioned, this is the tide and these are streams. So and we also think that resources that need stones to be opened up, like snails and a lot of these fruits and crabs, and also rocks, like these things are really conducive to stone tool use, but they also erase all evidence of it because streams flood, the tides come in every day. So you can kind of see what this behavior might have looked like in an ecosystem that's conducive to this behavior that wouldn't be preserved at all. So you might be able to, make some sense out of things that are hard to study in the fossil record from that. And also there's like a lot of really cool branch of archaeology, experimental archaeology, where you find something, people will have a bunch of stories about what the purpose of it was, and you can do an experiment where you'll be like, I wonder how these materials affect opening things, or I wonder how this stone tool opens up this stuff. So we're also kind of exploring some of the ideas of, can we do experimental archaeology with Capuchin monkeys where they use tools for us in certain ways, or use different materials or different anvils, and what are the wear patterns that an anvil gets? So how can we interpret the fossil record from behavior that we can observe from these camera traps on things that are relevant to archaeologists and paleoanthropologists? So we have this whole other group of collaborators who are interested in those questions, and we just help with our logistical and ecological knowledge when it comes in handy. And we've been pleasantly surprised, well, I won't speak for Claudio, but I've been pleasantly surprised with just how fascinating a lot of the archaeological and paleoanthropological stuff. Like Tamara Doganchik, who's the head archaeologist, paleoanthropologist, depending on the time era, she went there and she started doing her normal methodical stuff. And then once they realized how many tool sites there were, it was just like, this is just totally insane. Their minds were just totally blown, because it's so different than an archaeological site where things have been there for 100,000 to 3 million years. And it's just like, and they just had to reframe the way they ask questions about things, and also the methods with which they do things. So it's really exciting in that sense too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. I never would have thought of that, but that makes total sense how how you guys could both help each other out that way.
Yeah.
Man. Well, Brendan, Claudio, this was awesome. I love learning about this stuff. It's interesting stuff that I probably wouldn't normally be exposed to, but I'm glad I found you guys, and I appreciate you guys coming on and sharing all your info.
Thank you for the invitation. Yeah.
Cool. I think I saw it, but is there a place we can send people to check out any of the video footage that you guys have of the Capuchin monkeys?
Yeah, so
if it's easier, I can just get the link and put it in the description.
There's a link. I think most of the papers we've published have been open access. There's a YouTube video up that I had, and there's video on YouTube if you search Corbin National Park tool use. We had a paper in Royal Society. We can put some links up. That'll probably be easier. I could also share some video. That would be useful. So
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, so we'll, for people listening, we'll have that stuff in the show notes so they can maybe check out some footage or learn a bit more. But cool. Well, seriously, guys, thank you again. Really appreciate it. And yeah, have a good one.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You
Thanks.
too.